Can you guys see all this okay too? And kind of read it. I will decode the abbreviations and stuff like that. But basically, well, for those of you who don't know me, my name's Megan. I work out here usually in the morning, so if you're here in the evenings, less familiar faces. But I am a nutritional therapy practitioner. So I work with a lot of clients on a lot of different issues. So not always necessarily like body composition and performance, which is what a lot of us here at the gym are seeking out, but also issues ranging from autoimmune conditions to food allergies and intolerances, thyroid conditions, hormone imbalances, things like that, digestive issues. So kind of like a whole range there. But tonight what I'm going to talk about...
What's the name of your company?
It's just Megan Crozier, Nutritional Therapy, yeah.
Oh.
Yep, thanks. I do have a website too, so megancrozier.com. Basically, you can search my name and all my information will come up. So you can kind of find me anywhere on the internet. But tonight what I want to talk about, this is kind of what I've put together based on a lot of the common questions that I get. A lot of questions inside the gym too. So I'm not sure if any of you are signed up for my newsletter. Do you guys get the weekly nutrition? Okay, so if you're not on that, you definitely should. There's a link to it in the Facebook group. You can search it. But for the last 15 weeks or so, I've been sending out weekly emails, and some of the questions that I get back are in response to some of these things that I'll be talking about. So basically, all of the nutrition information out there, it can be pretty overwhelming, especially when we hear all of these different diets and trends and stuff like that. So instead of doing a very nutrition 101, here's your calories, here's your macros and stuff like that, you can look up a video on YouTube and find that information. I want to kind of just break down the different diets and trends, but also the usability of them and how to kind of make things work for you. So based on where you're at right now, depending on what your goals are, you'll figure out how to sort of customize something that works for you. And I obviously have my own philosophy just in terms of eating quality food and the experiences that I've had from working with clients. So I'll share that with you too, and the approach that I recommend at the end. But again, you can kind of decide for yourself what works and what doesn't. And that's a huge part. What I really try to encourage people is to be your own health detective. So whatever your goals are, whether it's you want to lose fat, you want to gain muscle, or maybe you have digestive issues you want to work on, gut health is super, super important. It's the foundation of overall health. Or maybe you want to lower inflammation, all of those things. The way you figure that stuff out is by actually listening to your body and doing something based on the feedback that your body gives you. So instead of just following rules or what someone tells you to do, and just kind of following that blindly, you're actually paying attention to your cues. So listening to your cravings, your hunger, your sleep, your digestion, all of those things are what really, really matter when you figure out what's working and what's not. It's not just stepping on a scale and seeing a change there. It's kind of a bigger picture there. So also understanding why you're doing what you're doing is important. So if you're following a diet but you don't know why you're following that diet, or you don't know why you're taking certain foods out, or you don't know why you're eating more fat or more carbs, that's really important to just dig deeper and understand. And I think when you understand why you're doing what you're doing, it's easier to stick to it too. So that helps with actually being consistent and sticking to it in the long term. So with that, these are kind of the criteria that I like to consider for figuring out what works for you. So if it doesn't fit within these 3 E's, it might not be a long-term sustainable diet, and that's what we're going for. So the name of this seminar is Fat Loss for Sustainable Living. We want it to be a long-term goal, not just a short, quick fix. So you have to figure out, is it enjoyable, is it easy, and is it effective? So if it is enjoyable, that should look like eating food on a daily basis that you actually enjoy. If you're just having chicken breast and rice and kale every single day, That might work for a week or two or even a few months. But if you're not enjoying it, then it's going to be a lot harder to stick to, and you might find yourself feeling like you're like on and off track or like on and off a diet. So you're either following it and then on the weekends you're not following it. So figuring out what you enjoy is really, really important. And then asking yourself, is it easy? So for that, it can depend a lot on your lifestyle. So what type of job you have, what your schedule is like. Do you have kids? Are you just meal prepping for one, or are you meal prepping for an entire family? All of those things are really important to consider. So following like a more strict diet might not be easy for you if you are feeding a family of 4, but if you have complete control over your schedule and you're only feeding yourself, then something like that might be a little bit easier. So that's just an example. And then effective. So this, again, depends on your goals, and this is the one that can change the most. So maybe right now your goal is fat loss, but like for a lot of my clients who are older, their goal is just to like have the energy to play with their kids, right? So what that looks like from person to person is going to vary based on what your goals are. And if you feel like you're not getting closer to your goal, so my rule of thumb is you have to follow something for at least 90 days to figure out if it's effective. A lot of people will go into something and they give it like a couple weeks, and then they get really frustrated because whatever outcome they're looking for, whether that's like a number on the scale or something like that, they don't see it right away. So you need to give it at least 90 days and actually be consistent with it to figure out if that's effective or not. And then after 90 days, if it's not, you need to change it up. And what I see a lot of people do, kind of like a mistake that people make, is if they do it for 90 days or even 30 days and it doesn't work, they try to do that same exact thing, but like be more strict with it. And usually it's not a matter of being more strict or trying to do that thing harder. It's actually a matter of like completely changing things up and making it different. So that's a point that I always like to make. Do you guys have any questions on those 3 E's? Does that all like make sense? Pretty basic, but just kind of like setting up the foundation for all this other stuff that I'll get into. So before we talk about this, I just want to do like a brief overview of these are the 2 most important things that I found you have to consider when choosing any type of plan or diet, nutrition plan, whatever you want to call it. Quality comes first, and since you've been following my emails, I know that you've probably, I've gotten that point across. I basically mention it every single email, but quality has to be like the foundation. So if you can't figure out how to eat real food consistently, like on a day-to-day basis, then jumping to all of these other like keto or counting macros or trying to do intermittent fasting, you're missing the most important part. So the quality is really important for getting what actually contributes to our health and our longevity. So getting the micronutrients, the vitamins and the minerals that you need basically to function, to carry out all of the different functions of your body. So quality is really, really important. It helps to lower inflammation and prevent disease. Basically, inflammation is the root cause of all of our chronic modern day diseases. So if you're just focusing on quality, you'll see a lot of improvement there. And everybody starts from different places with quality, right? Like some people are maybe really struggling because they eat a lot of fast food and that's hard for them to get away from, or maybe they're already eating kind of like the standard American healthy diet, which is like chicken breast and like low-fat foods and things like that, but they're missing out on a lot of the micronutrients, so they need to increase the nutrient density there. So a lot you can get into with quality, but really understanding that as the foundation. And then the second thing that is really overlooked, but basically is like a cure-all in my opinion, is blood sugar balance. So blood sugar balance sounds like something that only diabetics would have to be concerned with, but it applies to everybody. Especially to athletes and especially to people who are wanting to go through their day without feeling like they're hungry all the time or have cravings, or you don't want to have trouble sleeping or anything like that. And so blood sugar balance is kind of the foundation to regulate all of these things. So these are like the biofeedback markers that you get from your body. Asking yourself, how are your cravings, how's your sleep, how's your energy, How's your hunger? Do you feel like you can lose fat, or do you feel like you store fat pretty easily? And then also your mood. So that's where blood sugar balance comes into play, and I'll talk about it more, how it applies with each of these diets as well. But the reason, so micros are for quality, and then macros come into play with blood sugar balance, because how you balance your macros out helps to balance your blood sugar. So we have protein, carbs, and fats as our 3 macronutrients. And you can think of them kind of as different energy sources. So I think a lot of people jump to thinking like fat has a lot of calories, whereas carbs and protein have less calories, which is true. But I like to think of it in terms of how they are providing fuel to our body. So carbs are like our quick, fast sources of energy. And then fat is going to be your long, slow-burning sources of energy. And then protein is kind of in between. It's more of a building macronutrient, so we think of it as building our muscles, our tissues, and things like that. So with that, how you distribute these just in your day-to-day nutrition plan will affect your blood sugar. So if you're eating a ton of carbs, that's going to cause more of an impact on your blood sugar. It's going to spike your blood sugar. And since it's a quick and fast source of energy, it's going to drop quickly after. So for example, like if you eat an entire banana, it's going to increase your blood sugar and then drop, and you might feel hungry like 30 minutes after that. In comparison to something like half of a banana and maybe a couple tablespoons of almond butter or peanut butter, which is your fat, you're probably going to stay full for a longer period of time, even if it's the same amount of calories. So the latter is balancing your blood sugar, right? Combining like the carb with the healthy fats, and then just eating a carb on its own will kind of be that quick source of energy, which can be useful if you are using it for, say, a workout or something like that. So there's a time and place for carbs, and then there's a time and place for fat. And then again, protein is kind of like your most stable macronutrient that generally stays the same. It can adjust day to day based on what you're doing and how much strength training you're doing and stuff like that. But yeah, so that's what I wanted to say about macros and how it relates to blood sugar. Does that make sense? Kind of with that up and down blood sugar roller coaster versus having that even keel throughout the day. Yeah.
You said like fats slower burning and then carbs is faster burning. So where would protein lie with that?
So I think of, so protein, I don't think of it as an energy source. I think of it as like a structural type thing. So that's what's building, again, like your muscles and your tissues and things like that. Yeah.
I have a question.
Yeah.
So you talked about carbs. Is it like a great like pre-workout meal?
Yeah.
It
So
affects your insulin, but working out inhibits your insulin, so it lowers your blood sugar.
it depends. So where your blood sugar is at right now will depend like how you need to fuel your body before a workout. So some people, they can't get through a workout without giving themselves that source of energy first from carbohydrates. Whereas other people, they might be able to do a workout and actually use fat for fuel instead. So it kind of depends. I find that a lot of the people who are eating carb-heavy meals more frequently throughout the day, usually they need something before workout. Otherwise, they'll feel like they kind of like tank and hit a wall. Whereas if you are eating, which we'll talk about with the macro adjustments, but if you're eating more fat throughout the day, then you might not need something before your workout. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
But also, if you are doing a workout where it's something that like you want to PR and like really give it your all, then you can use those carbs before your workout. So, and also kind of on that note, you'll see a lot of like endurance athletes, they do better with more fat because that is the long, slow burning source of energy. Whereas athletes like CrossFitters will do better with more carbohydrates since they're doing more of those quick, fast type of workouts.
People going keto?
We'll talk about that. Yeah, it has a time and a place. So yeah, we'll talk about how that applies. But yeah, with CrossFit athletes, I think going keto for a really long time would be tough. but you can still follow a keto diet and cycle in carbohydrates to help your workouts. So
metabolic confusion, is that what you're talking about?
kind of like being metabolically flexible. Yeah. Okay, any more questions on macros? Then we'll get into this stuff. Okay. So have you guys all heard of paleo, keto? Okay. And then intermittent fasting, and then macros, which macros is kind of like, I know I already talked about macros over here, but I'm talking about macros as in a, like, if it fits your macros type plan, which is really common among CrossFit community, bodybuilding, weight training, things like that. So hopefully you guys have heard of all three of those. But we will start with the paleo one. So the way I like to think of paleo is this is like your quality food diet, right? So this is telling you exactly what to eat, and it gets rid of a lot of the common inflammatory foods. I feel like this one has been around, well, it literally has been around for the longest, but we've known about it for, this is the one that got popular probably like 10 or 15 years ago, I would say. But with that, you are really focusing on quality food. So it removes a lot of the common inflammatory foods, like gluten, processed dairy, grains, legumes, things like that. And I also find it to be very useful for people with food allergies and intolerances, and with digestive issues too, since it does take out a lot of those foods that are difficult to digest. It's also really good for people who have autoimmune conditions, so like celiac or Hashimoto's or rheumatoid arthritis, a lot of aches and pains. Going on a fairly strict paleo diet is pretty beneficial for a lot of people. So with that, the approach that I like to take to the paleo diet is once you stick to that template, again, removing grains, gluten, legumes, processed dairy, then you can see how you feel and adjust from there. So you can add certain foods back in after you follow that, and kind of customize your template. So for me, for example, I would say I follow a paleo diet, but I know that I can still handle grains. So if I want to have grains, I have gluten-free grains. That's just an example for me. For other people, it might look like they actually do totally fine with dairy, and so they can add dairy back in and incorporate that into their diet. But some of the things to pay attention to as well when you're following a more quality diet, in addition to your hunger and cravings and things like that, little things that we think are kind of like normal on a day-to-day basis that aren't, because they're reactions to like food intolerances and inflammation. So things like headaches, skin issues, low energy, trouble sleeping, which also ties into blood sugar. I'll talk about that. But those are just some of the things to pay attention to. So like processed dairy, it causes a lot of skin issues and congestion and like immune issues. So that's where you can kind of figure out like, does it work for me or does it not? But that's just one type of template to follow. Also, the other thing I really like about paleo is that it does incorporate good quality proteins. So it focuses on properly raised animal proteins, which are your complete sources. Whereas like a vegetarian or vegan diet, you're not getting those complete sources of protein. You can still get quality foods, but you might not be getting all of the amino acids that you need. So paleo also incorporates a lot of the traditional foods that seem trendy kind of now, but that have been around for a long time. So like bone broth, I'm sure you guys have heard about like drinking bone broth and the benefit of that. And also fermented foods, which are really good for gut health. So fermented foods or probiotics, those all kind of go back to that ancestral diet type template. So that's kind of what I have to say about paleo. And then also the macros can vary. So this is a quality focused plan. It doesn't account for calories or the amount of protein, carbs, or fat you're getting. So you could make it lower carb if you wanted to. You could make it higher carb. You could do paleo and eat a ton of like fruits and really starchy vegetables and get a lot of carbohydrates, or you can make it lower carb. You could make it, again, higher fat. You could get more protein. All of those things are pretty variable. So that's why you can combine things. Like you could be doing paleo and keto if you wanted to. or paleo, and then you're adjusting your macros. So does that make sense, like the paleo explanation there? Okay. So then moving on from that, we have the keto diet, which has also been around for a really long time. It was actually first studied for neurological disorders. So it was used to treat epilepsy in children. And I like to think of it as more of a therapeutic diet, in that it does help those neurological conditions. And basically, the reason for that is because you are using ketones for fuel. And ketones are like fuel for your brain. So that's like the very simplest way that I like to explain it. But in general, so it's a very high fat, very low carb. Usually like, 5 to 10% of your calories are coming from carbohydrates, and then also moderate protein. And that's because the carbs and the protein will have an effect on insulin levels. So that's going to affect your blood sugar more, whereas the fat does not have any impact on your blood sugar. So that's why the keto diet is really, really good for balancing blood sugar. It's not having that impact on insulin. You're not on that blood sugar roller coaster, and you're utilizing ketones for fuel. So looking at that, you're going to just be burning more fat on a daily basis. Also with the keto diet, since you are eating so much fat, it is a lot more satiating, so you'll feel full for longer, and you'll probably be eating less frequently, unless you just want to keep eating all of the higher fat foods, but for the most part, you'll feel pretty satiated throughout the day. So with the keto diet though, so a lot of people think, and this is kind of like my own little twist on it, but you don't have to follow like black and white rules of like being in ketosis versus not. You can still follow that high fat, low carb template and see a lot of benefits in terms of like your blood sugar balance. So, maybe you're not doing 5 to 10% of your calories from carbohydrates, maybe you're getting a little bit more, or you're cycling in those carbohydrates. Like I mentioned before, you can have higher carb days. And your body will know how to use those carbs. You can use them for energy. So maybe on your more active days, you are having more carbohydrates, for example. So you can kind of fit within that template, but not have to be measuring for ketones every single day. Some people do that, and they find that it really does help them. But if you don't want to go to those lengths, you can still see benefits from just adjusting your macronutrients in that way. The other thing with keto too is so men and women are a lot different hormonally, and I find that women are a little bit more sensitive to going lower carb, just because of the amount of stress that it can cause on your body. So men can handle stress a little bit better, and so for them to go higher fat, lower carb, they'll see a little bit more benefits long term, whereas women, they might need to incorporate a little bit more carbohydrates, or at least cycle them in a little bit more often. So I think that's it on keto that I wanted to say. Last thing, with keto too, you will see a lot of like dirty keto versions. So you still want to focus on quality, right? So you still want to make sure you're eating high quality fats, good carbohydrates, high quality protein, but you could also follow a keto diet and eat like processed Kraft cheese fried in butter and sprinkled with more cheese. I don't know, like what people do. Or like whipped cream. Like you can eat the crappiest food. You can eat conventional meats. You can do like conventional red meat and chicken and stuff like that. And then your carbs could be coming from like a piece of bread or something like that. So you want to make sure that you're still following good quality, which I think is also why keto gets a bad rap, because you'll see like recipes for something that's keto and it's literally like all of these processed junk foods. So just something to consider there. Do you guys have any questions on keto or any of that? Yes.
Do you recommend like carb cycling during the days you actually work out, like you have a high intensity workout?
I think it depends. I think it depends on how you want to perform. So like I'll actually go higher carb on days I don't work out, and then the next day, Yeah, yep. And then the next day, I'll actually like feel a little bit better in the gym because of those glycogen stores that you've built up from eating the carbohydrates. Yeah. So so that's one way to go about it. But other people, they might want to cycle those carbs in like after their workouts or something like that, or if they're, having a competition day or something like that, then they're going to be eating more carbs to get them through that day. If that makes sense. Okay, yeah. Any more questions on keto? Is that helpful for you guys? Does that kind of like filter through some things you've heard? Or okay. So then next up, macros. Again, talking about this as it fits into like a macro template or if it fits your macros. And just like keto, you can do this with really crappy food, or you can do it with quality food, which is why I like to start with the quality food. But with the macros, so for example, you could be eating like Pop-Tarts as your carbs and I don't know, like canola oil as your fat. But you want to focus on quality first and foremost. So considering that, I kind of look at the macro templates that are out there. There's the most popular one is usually going to be lower fat, higher carb, small frequent meals, right? Like that's kind of the classic bodybuilding template. And people also like to follow that, I think, because of the myth around small frequent meals being better for your metabolism, which actually is not true. And that is one thing that will put you on that blood sugar roller coaster, and also relying on carbohydrates often, because your body is always expecting that source of fuel to come in. So when you don't get it for 2 or 3 hours, that's when you start to get really hungry, really cranky, and it feels like it is hard to go a really long time without eating. So that usually, again, comes with the higher carb, lower fat meals that you're eating more frequently. And the reason that it's adjusted that way is because calorie per gram, fat is going to be 9 calories per gram, whereas protein and carbs are only 4 calories per gram. So if we're just looking at the calories in, calories out equation, and we're not considering all of the other things that are coming into play, like blood sugar balance and hormones and vitamins and minerals, all those micronutrients, then we'll pull fat out first and foremost because that gets rid of the most calories. But if we adjust it so that we're still getting the same amount of calories, then we still want to have fat, but as fat goes up, carbs will go down. So these two I like to think of kind of working in opposition. If you're higher carb, you're going to be lower fat. If you're higher fat, you're going to be lower carb, and that's because you're kind of staying within the same caloric range, which is how macro plans are built out. So you fit within a caloric range based on your goals. So if maintenance is your goal, you might stay with whatever your calculated calories are to maintain. If you want to lose weight, you're going to decrease that slightly, but not too much. If you decrease too much too quickly, then that will cause kind of like a metabolic compensation where your metabolism will slow down to adjust and conserve energy, which is why dieting for long periods of time doesn't work, and you usually gain that weight back pretty easily. But you want to just make sure that you are, again, lowering your calories slightly if you want to lose weight, and then upping if you're trying to maybe put on mass, build more muscle. So you set your calorie range, and then you fit your macronutrients, protein, carbs, and fat within that caloric range. And I find that, so tracking macros, I think long-term can be pretty mentally taxing. It's not something that should be considered like your healthy diet. Like if you feel like you're on track and off track based on if you're keeping track of your macros, then you need to figure out a little bit more like what works for your body intuitively. But I think for shorter periods of time, to gain awareness and know what makes you feel your best. So knowing that you feel good whenever you get 150 grams of protein and what that actually looks like in your day is important. And if you don't know the difference between if you're getting like 20 grams of protein versus 150 grams of protein, then tracking that for a period of time is really helpful just to get that feedback. Same thing with carbohydrates. If you are feeling like you can't recover in the gym and like you're exhausted all the time, you need to figure out like, do you need to increase your carbs? if you're hungry all the time, then maybe you need to increase your fat a little bit more. So that's where you can use those biofeedback markers and then adjust your macronutrients accordingly. And that's how I like to figure out the macronutrients rather than, again, like the small frequent meal or getting a template that just kind of goes off of percentages. Like you should be within a range with every single one. So it's gonna vary, again, based on your mood and your energy and things like that. And then like low fat, high carb. So low fat, high carb is a small frequent meals, a little bit more taxing on your blood sugar. And then high fat, low carb is kind of similar to keto, but again, it's not like that extreme low carb. But you're gonna be eating less frequent meals and you'll have a more stable blood sugar. So I find this one to be most useful for like real life application. Like you wake up in the morning, you can eat, you can go to work, and you're not hungry, you can like stay focused on things, and then again, eat lunch, and then you're satisfied for 4 or 5 hours, and then you eat dinner. So it's a lot simpler, and you're not having to eat all of the time. You don't feel hungry. And since it's stabilizing your blood sugar, it's gonna help your cravings, but it's also gonna help your sleep, because what happens whenever we either can't fall asleep or we can't stay asleep, so we're waking up at like 3 a.m., that's a result of your blood sugar dropping, and then as a result, your stress hormone cortisol spikes and wakes you up. So that's how that ties into sleep too, which is why I really like more of like incorporating the fats whenever you can to stabilize your blood sugar. So does that make sense, like those two different approaches? And again, like figuring out what works for you. If you like to eat all the time and you really, really like carbs, then I mean, you can do the higher carb, lower fat. You'd have to drop the fat to stay within that caloric range. But if that works for you, then you definitely can do it that way too. And that's why I also like to point out too, like a lot of people who you might follow like on Instagram who are maybe CrossFit athletes or again, bodybuilders or something like that, their life and their job kind of revolves around that, basically fueling their body. And so for them, they're eating a ton of food and they're eating frequently, and they are using carbohydrates to fuel their body constantly. So they're not like sitting in the car on their commute to work and then sitting at their desk and then just coming to the gym for an hour. That's where our lifestyle's a little bit different than the people we follow on Instagram. So yeah, do you guys have questions on macros? Anything there? Okay. Have any of you guys tried to follow like a macro specific plan, or maybe at least just track like how much protein you're getting, stuff like that? It definitely does, it works for fat loss and for holding yourself accountable too. So if you're feeling like you don't even know where to start, obviously start with quality, but then get a better idea of where those macronutrients are for yourself. And that'll be really helpful. Is it still recording? Okay, so last one, and I tied this kind of into all of it because it's not so much a diet as it is a like meal timing template. So intermittent fasting, people say, oh, I'm following intermittent fasting, or I'm doing an intermittent fasting diet. It doesn't say anything about what you should and shouldn't eat, but that's what the quality is for, right? So we go back to the quality for what we should and shouldn't eat. So basically what it consists of is a period where you're feeding and then a period where you're fasting. And there's different times for this. So the most common is going to be 16-8. So that would be 16 hours of fasting, 8 hours of feeding. That's the most basic one that I usually like to start with to explain to people, because it's really easy to just picture like the real life application. But there are other ones too where you can fast for 2 days, and then you're eating regularly for 5 days. And some people will do like more extended fasts, or just maybe like a 24-hour fast every week or something like that. But the idea is that, so during your feeding window, that's whenever insulin is working, so your blood sugar is basically doing things, and then your digestion is working. So your digestion is working, your blood sugar is working, and then during that fasting state, you're giving those things a break. So you give your digestion a break, and you give your insulin a break, and you allow the opposing hormone, which is glucagon, to come in and actually use fat for fuel. So during that fasted state, you're burning the fat that you have for fuel. And that teaches your body to use fat for fuel, which is nice because during times when we're not eating, like when we're sleeping, for example, or maybe there's a really long wait at the restaurant, or you're traveling and you don't want to eat the airplane food, like that's where that comes in handy because your body knows how to tap into your fat stores for fuel instead of needing to have like another source of carbohydrates. So that's like the feeding versus fasting stage, just how I like to think of it. And also, if the idea of going like 16 hours without eating really, really freaks you out, I think the simplest way to think about it is just think about when you stop eating dinner. So say you stop eating dinner at 7 p.m. And then you go to bed, and then the next day, so 7 a.m. would be 12 hours, and then you just extend your breakfast from there, basically. So if you wake up right now and you're starving, again, that's a sign that maybe you're not able to use fat for fuel yet, but you can start to adjust by increasing the amount of fat you're eating with dinner, go longer in the morning, and then extend your breakfast. So maybe you're eating at 8 a.m., 9 a.m., 10 a.m., all the way up until like 11 or 12. And then that's your first meal that breaks your fast. And you want that to be like a solid meal too. It's not like a little snack. It's like you're having your protein and your fat and your good carbohydrates with that meal. So, do you guys have questions on intermittent fasting? I know you got a lot of info from the newsletter lately because I did that kind of like 2-part series as well. And also just to mention, like it's not for everybody. Again, women are more sensitive to fasting than men are. So I don't recommend doing like really long extended fasts for women, especially if you feel like it starts to affect your hormones a little bit more. So you just have to be really in tune with, again, your sleep and your cravings and all of that stuff. If you have digestive issues too, like feeling bloated all the time after you eat every single meal, then fasting can really help with that because you are resetting your digestive system and kind of giving it a break during that fasted state. So it can be helpful there too. But yeah, so this applies to no matter what you're following, right? So generally intermittent fasting will work better or to feel more comfortable if you're eating enough healthy fats and protein and you're not doing the small frequent meals, because when you go a long time without eating, you're not getting the small frequent meals and it's a little bit more stressful for your body. But if your blood sugar is stable and if you're eating quality food, then intermittent fasting is a really good advanced tool for, again, teaching your body how to burn more fat and kind of use that as a fuel source. So that's how that all kind of ties in. So do you guys have any questions on any of those different ones? Or is there something else that you've heard of that you're curious about? Maybe another
Question on intermittent fasting, say you like start your first meal like 2 p.m. or whatever, is it safe to work out, like do a CrossFit workout 8 a.m. or something and then still fast in the morning?
It depends. So everybody's different. I personally can because my blood sugar is pretty stable based on like what I eat on a day-to-day basis. But if you're under a lot of stress and like your sleep isn't dialed in, or you have other stressors going on at work, or maybe it is a really, really stressful workout for you on that day, you might want to eat something sooner whenever you work out. And also if like building muscle, like if you want to build muscle and that's your goal versus like maintaining, then you probably want to eat a little bit sooner after your workout. But yeah, and then also like especially for females, if you don't eat and then you feel like you're tanking, like at 9 a.m. or something like that, then that's definitely a sign that you need to fuel your body right after a workout.
Does the timing for like the feeding and fasting, like everything else, vary based on like feedback from your body? Like can you adjust to 16 and 8 to like 12, 12?
Yeah. Well, so do you mean like the time frame of the day that you're eating?
Like could you, instead of fasting for 16 hours, could you start with 12 or 14 and see how you feel?
Yeah. I usually recommend starting with like 12 and 12,
Okay.
and then adjusting from there. Like most people should be able to do 12 hours because that's, 8 o'clock you stop eating dinner, and then 8 a.m. you eat breakfast. That should be pretty doable. But then also, like, depending on your schedule, you can adjust the window that you're eating too. So if you, you want to start eating at like 6 a.m. and then you would just stop earlier. You could do that, or you could eat like kind of the second half of the day. So you can change that based on your schedule too. Or you could eat all night if you wanted to, and then not eat during the day. Yes. But yeah. Any more questions on any of that? Hey, Kathleen. So yeah, just kind of like going back and just like tying all this together, keeping in mind the importance of blood sugar balance no matter what plan you're following. I think that's like a huge missing piece for a lot of people, because again, they're just like kind of blindly following rules and like eat this, not that type guidelines. But if you think about keeping your blood sugar balanced and the effect that each one of the macronutrients has on your blood sugar and really paying attention to that, then it'll help a lot with, again, not feeling hungry and your cravings and using fat for fuel and all of that stuff. So always just kind of like go back to that and keep that in mind. And again, with any of these two, what your goal is, if you want to maintain versus lose fat versus put on muscle, that's where you'll adjust your macronutrient ratio and the amount of calories that you're eating in a day. Usually people start out with not eating enough calories and they have to actually increase their calories, but stabilize their blood sugar at the same time, and that's what's really, really helpful. So rather than just thinking about restricting calories, which is the first thing we kind of go to when we think, we want to lose weight or lose fat, what it actually should be is eating enough calories to really fuel your metabolism, but you're just adjusting those macronutrients to help balance your blood sugar. So that's the way that I like to think of it, instead of, again, only tracking the calories. So just like kind of like the takeaways, again, going back to the 3 E's, considering all that when you're figuring out a plan that works for you, figure out what's enjoyable, figure out what's easy based on your schedule. Can you spend hours meal prepping, or do you need to do something more convenient, like ordering your meal prep meals or something like that? And then effective too, depending on what your goals are, that will change. But you need to figure out, giving it a chance of at least 90 days, is it working for you? If not, you need to change it up. And then thinking about quality first and foremost, really dialing in on that, and just kind of using paleo as a guideline to start with that, sort of as a template, but then you can adjust based on, again, you don't need to unnecessarily restrict foods if you do fine with them, but figuring out what foods work for you and don't work for you is really important. And then you can kind of like make up your own rules based on that. And then, just recognizing these 3 macronutrients and how each one fuels your body, and how they tie together to balance your blood sugar. And paying attention to the biofeedback, like I mentioned, the cravings, the energy, the sleep, all of those things, the digestion. That's what, like, the plan that works for you should address all of those areas. And you should feel like it's something that you can stick to long term. So if it feels unsustainable, or you feel like you are deprived by following something, again, you can think of it as a temporary plan, but eventually you want to figure out how to adjust to have more of a long-term plan that works for you. So, anybody have questions? I think that's kind of everything that I wanted to do to wrap things up.
Awesome. Thank you.
Is it on then? I was going to look at the clock, but I got pretty full.